Contest was more like a pickup contest because everybody from everywhere came to the contest, see? And even from where I had to come from, it took us an all-day drive to get there without no freeways or nothing, you know? And we still would drive down to the place, you know? And then drive back after the contest was over all night long. Anyway, I can't even remember what the man lifted, but it was impressive because every time he lifted, everybody's brother stopped talking or whatever to watch the man lift because they'd never seen this heavy of a weight lifted before by any individual, see? And he was just beginning then, see? He wasn't no national champion yet, see? He was a terrific man, see?
By July of 1953, Paul had moved his squat up to over 762 pounds, some 97 pounds more than any other human. 2 months later, at the All-Dixie meet again in Chattanooga, he pressed 352 pounds for a national record. In October of 1953, the first movie footage ever taken of Paul Anderson was taken at an international meet held in Montreal, Canada, where he took first place, setting a new Canadian Open record.
Paul Anderson of the USA lifts 330 pounds on his first try at a body weight of 310. And now Anderson handles 402 pounds, the new champ. And brother, he can really toss his weight around.
A month later, he traveled to York, Pennsylvania, where he set a new world record total of 1,065 pounds in the 3 Olympic lifts, beating a record that had taken dozens of years for 8-time world and Olympic champion John Davis to achieve. By now, he was squatting with 820 pounds, more than 200 pounds better than world champion Doug Hepburn of Canada. In addition, he had increased his body weight to 300 pounds, with 21-inch arms, 16-inch forearms, 23-inch neck, 58-inch chest, and 34-inch thighs. 1954 proved disastrous for Paul when he injured his leg while working out with a 3,500-pound safe he'd been using in a hip lift to build overall strength. Apparently, Paul had lifted the safe many times in the past, but late one evening strained himself trying to pull the massive safe, only to find out later the safe had frozen to the ground. Later, he broke his wrist in Indianapolis while trying for a new world record, and then, as a passenger in a friend's car, broke several ribs and injured his hip when the vehicle ran off the road and smashed into a tree. Determined to not be slowed, Paul rebuilt the cast on his arm using steel supports and a rod that could be used to pull or push the weights so that he could continue working out. On February the 12th of 1955 in Washington, D.C., Paul Anderson reappeared on the scene and promptly put together history's first 1,100-pound total. 2 months later, in April, at High Point YMCA in North Carolina, Paul performed the world's first official 400-pound press, pressing a barbell weighing 402¼ pounds, with what witnesses later described as ridiculously easy, breaking the old record by more than 15 pounds. His total at the end of the day was a phenomenal 1,142½ pounds, 68 pounds in excess of the official world record. Herb Glossbrenner of Los Angeles, California, a world champions lifter and highly renowned and respected powerlifting statistician who has been a national sports writer for the last 30 years, recounts where he first saw Paul Anderson.
When I was a young boy, like all young boys need to find a role model, I went to a movie in the summer of 1955, June 1955, 13 years of age. And in those days they had the newsreels. And suddenly I was completely mesmerized by this sports figure which came up on the screen, Paul Anderson. Paul Anderson was the most amazing human being I'd ever seen. You're talking about a man that was what people thought a weightlifter should look like. He was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighed about 350 pounds, and was lifting weights that no human being had ever even imagined could be lifted. From that day on, I became completely enraptured in the thought of the sport of weightlifting, strength, human endeavor, and Paul Anderson was my boyhood idol, and for the past 35 years he has remained so.
On June the 4th of 1955, at the Senior Nationals in Cleveland, Ohio, the 22-year-old Paul set yet another world's record by clean and jerking 436.5 pounds. Witnesses at the Senior Nationals described the lifts as easy for Paul, and I quote, "They had never seen such physical power."
Now have a look at Paul Anderson, the world's strongest man, who tosses his weight around, a 400-pound weight. Nice going, Paul. What do you think about 435 pounds? Paul strong-arms his way to a new world's record, 436.5 pounds, and brother, he really gets a lift out of it.
Paul's performance in Cleveland won him a last-minute seat on an airplane leaving for the Soviet Union, where the Americans would face off against the Russians. The Russians paid little attention as the heavy 23-year-old American fill-in walked off the plane. But after the competition held on the evening of June the 15th, the Russians and the world would be blasted with pictures and articles of the Georgia native proclaiming him the strongest man on earth. In spite of a drizzling rain, 16,000 Russians packed into Gorky Park to watch the competition, pitting the Russians against the Americans. The crowd was exuberant when their heavyweight champion tied the Olympic record with a press just over 330 pounds. The young man from the U.S. stepped up and had the bar loaded with 402.5 pounds. The officials and audience were amused, for the Olympic record had just been tied at 330 pounds, and the all-time world's record was only 381 pounds. Who was this huge lifter, they asked themselves? Was this a joke? Did he really think he could possibly lift such a tremendous weight? The audience quickly drew quiet as the colossal American wrapped his hands around the bar and began to throw the weights up, and without expression pushed the weights overhead as if they were toys. Anderson recalls that the whole park fell dead quiet and that all you could hear was the patter of the rain drizzling from overhead. After the crowd realized what they'd just seen, the silence was broken with a tremendous applause that shook the stage. One elderly Russian stated, "I can die happy now. I have seen the greatest thing in history." Others treated him as a god and dubbed him Mr. America, the wonder of nature. The young man from Toccoa, Georgia, after only some 36 months of competitive lifting, had just broken the world record by 22 pounds, the biggest margin in history. Some Russians responded that the American's record should not be counted, for they insisted he was not a normal person. His imposing 340-pound figure that now sported a 23.5-inch neck, 22.25-inch arms, 58-inch chest, 47-inch waist, and 36-inch thighs, coupled with the ease with which he lifted the world record weights, left more than the Russians awestruck, for what people were seeing was a raw power such as had never been seen before, and what many people believe will never be seen again. To this day, the Russians hold high respect for the man who at Gorky Park set the new world record. Bob Hayes of Los Angeles, California, an outstanding lifter in the 40s and founder of Maverick Barbell Company, the American Weightlifting Association, and founder and editor of the publication International Olympic Lifter, traveled to Russia in 1975 for the World Weightlifting Championships. Mr. Hayes described to us how the Russians, some 20 years later, were still paying great tribute to the American lifter from Georgia.
Then I went to the World Weightlifting Championships in '75 in Moscow. And they held the World Championships in an ice rink. And it was a kind of not a round, an oval shape. And all around the outside, or the corridor, went all the way around this ice rink. And they had pictures of famous weightlifters everywhere, American lifters and French lifters and German lifters and English and Egyptians, but Paul Anderson was the idol. I counted 144 pictures in this display of Paul Anderson. They were very impressed with him, and of course the pictures signified that's what they thought of him. And they have always honored and felt that extreme strength was a very great asset in a human being.
Back home, Paul had become a hero. A hero many say came along just at the right time for the United States, and a hero the little town of Toccoa took great pride in claiming as theirs. Paul's return to the States after his Russian competition resulted in the townspeople of Toccoa driving to Atlanta to meet their hero as he came off the plane. When the caravan of vehicles arrived at the airport, however, they waited only to discover Paul had missed the flight. Ironically, stepping off the plane only to discover a disappointed crowd was Bob Hope. Hope did, however, take time to chat with the children before everyone returned to Toccoa empty-handed. Paul arrived later in the evening, where a small crowd of die-hard reporters got a quick interview with the new strongman before he drove to Toccoa. The next day, the little town of Toccoa was alive with newspaper, magazine, radio, and television reporters finding their way to the home of the world's strongest man. Paul Anderson had been thrown into the spotlight, including a personal meeting with then Vice President Richard Nixon. The young man from Georgia continued through 1955, setting new world records in lifting competitions held overseas as part of an American and U.S. Goodwill Ambassadors team. During the overseas trips, Paul continued to devastate records, like in Munich, Germany, where he set a new world's record press of 409 pounds and a new world's record total of 1,129.5 pounds. The press record stood for 10 years.
Men of 24 nations meet in Munich, 108 members of the International Beef Trust vying for the world's weightlifting championships. Bantamweights, featherweights, heavyweights, all stout men and true, out to win glory for themselves and their countries. Canada's Daly struggles mightily to lift some 250 pounds, the medium heavy's goal.